Hello everyone, Set here. I'm going to be going over my tier list for the upcoming beta on November 20th. In case you don't know who I am, I'm one of NA's, actually the world's top trike players with top performances in arena, damage, wins, etc. On both NA and EU. So let's get into it. I've arranged my tier list a bit differently than what you may have seen from other creators. So I have 4 categories here, and these are kind of all designed to be complements. So you generally don't find substitutes between these 4 columns, with the one exception maybe being the first and the third, because I think some of the DPS units are exchangeable in certain scenarios, but generally these are all going to be complements, and then substitutes will be the rows. So I think that, like, as an example, Brawl, Ghost, and Shrike are all substitutes for Myth, who I think is the strongest of maybe these 5 at the moment. So we also have like our meta staple hunters, pretty self-explanatory. These are going to be the most popular units, the strongest, that are kind of staples in most competitive team comps. We have alternatives, which are other options in the event that you don't play these hunters or that you one-trick one of these in the second row. With the one exception being Felix, he's right now for me a toss-up between meta and alternatives, but I'll get into that in a later part of the video. And then we have like our niche/counter picks, which are good in some scenarios, but generally are not preferred. And then Underwhelming, which Celeste is the only hunter in the Underwhelming category for me. And I think that you're just better off picking somebody else if you wanted to play competitively. So with that, let's get into it. Starting off with Myth, she received the most changes, the most substantial changes this patch. So big thing being that her scaling ratio for AP on her auto attack has gone up significantly. So with purple and gold equipment, you're going to see a significant increase in her performance. She also got a major buff to her rain of arrows, her level 3, which is, I think, the most important change this patch for her. And then there's a few other things for Heart Piercer, and her ult got a 10% damage buff, which is really huge. So I think that of these kind of DPS units, I think that she's going to be the most consistent into the majority of teams. Myth can respond to dive comps better than I think Shrike and Ghost can. And then Brawl has that melee restriction, which makes it difficult to be an all-arounder. So I think he's more of a situational pick. But let's talk about Oath for now. Oath is, he didn't get any major nerfs, and I think that that's okay. I think that Oath being meta and staple is actually pretty healthy for the game. His damage isn't crazy. He's just a tank with healing. His healing did get nerfed a little bit, but I don't think it's, again, I don't think it's super substantial, and I don't think that that's going to alter his general utility. So I think that he will remain a safe choice, one that complements pretty much every other hunter in the game, including Felix, actually. Kingpin and Hudson. Kingpin, I think, is maybe a questionable meta pick, though I do think with his damage and in particular his late game abilities, like, he is going to be a powerhouse. He's already been, in Next Fest and the tech test on Monday, he was already quite strong, and I think that an additional buff to his auto damage will be even better. Just like, he's not as like overpowered as I think Hudson will be and as Zeph is, but he definitely is not going to be like as strong as Bishop was last patch. But I do think he's going to be a staple. I'm confident. Hudson is probably going to be the most OP hunter this patch. So he actually, in my opinion, kind of got a buff. So he's going to have bloom that starts out wide and then zeroes in the longer you hold it, which is fine. So reduced accuracy to begin with, which is kind of nice. But he got an increase in range. And I think that this is kind of insane because the meta, to me, it seems, is shifting from a dive comp to front to back. So Hudson can now compete with Shrike, Myth, and Ghost, and Jewel, I guess, if you want to throw her in there, at extended range, which I think is kind of unfair. I think that Hudson will be the most abused. So his dash, in addition to this range, is going to be problematic for strike. So the way that I'm going to be dealing with Hudson this patch personally is like our comp has a Jhin player who can just shut Hudson's down, but not every comp is going to have that. So Hudson's going to be a major threat. Zeph, of course, with his movement speed buffs, healing, built-in GA, and CC with that suck is just going to be, again, he's going to remain a staple pick for most comps. That suck and R just combos so well with like virtually every hunter in the game. I mean, especially like, of course, like Void, Shrike, Ghost, Brawl, I mean, Myth now even as well. So he's going to remain being one of the best, or rather like the best support, in my opinion. Yeah, Zeph is going to, again, just meta staple unit. Okay, moving on to alternatives. So Brawl I was kind of touching on a bit earlier. I think Brawl is going to be tougher to find a place. It's going to be tougher for Brawls to find a place this patch because I think the meta is, again, shifting from dive to front to back, but you can definitely still do dive comps. Like, I think like Oath, Felix, Brawl, and Bishop is still going to be viable. I just don't think it's going to be as common. He got, I think, a couple minor buffs, like targeted more towards lower skilled players. But they just, so they increased his max angle on the left mouse button. So it's a slice rather than a box, which is substantially easier to hit. Ghost, I think, is underrated right now, actually. So Amp, which is his best item, didn't get a nerf, and so that's still very strong. And his spike grenade is now going to attach to Oath's shield. And a couple other examples. I mean, Celeste's shield as well, but we don't really care too much about that. But yeah, big thing is being able to apply pressure to people behind Oath's shield, and to Oath is going to be pretty massive. It's going to be hard for like Hudson's to stack with Oath. They have to be more careful about positioning, and that'll lead to more mistakes. And then you open up possibilities for the R. And so all of that in combination with, again, that amp item, I think is going to make Ghost exceptional this patch. Shrike is going to, I mean, she excels with front-to-back teams going into them and playing with them. And so I think she is obviously going to be stronger than she was in Next Fest because her biggest counters were the main, were meta, right? So you had like Felix and Bishop that were just absolutely dominating. And that made it really hard to play Shrike because if you made essentially any positioning mistake or used your shift in a wrong moment, you're going to be punished pretty much instantly and just dead. So yeah, I do think that with hopefully with Felix seeing less playtime and Bishop seeing less playtime, Bishop receiving the most substantial nerfs this patch, Shrike is going to be stronger. She also is really good into Oath. She has like, I don't know, probably the fastest shield break of any hunter right now. I'll have to test like with Ghost. I don't know how Ghost performs, but right now I think that Shrike is still the fastest to break Oath's shield. If you pop Bird and then do a passive proc, you basically just one-shot it. Or two-shot it. So, yeah, Shrike's is going to be very good this patch, provided Felix and Bishop don't see a ton of playtime. Moving on to Felix, he received some minor nerfs, and it's actually not super clear to me exactly what happened. So, if you didn't know, before Steam Next Fest, Felix had less toughness, so that he actually received a toughness buff that was not listed before Steam Next Fest. And so if that is the optimization in question that they're removing, I think Felix is going to be definitely an alternative and not so much a metal or staple pick. If the optimization is sort of what's listed here, which was like in Steam Next Fest, you could evade the self slow by just spam tapping auto attack. So if that's the optimization that they removed, then I think he's going to remain a staple pick because this cooldown is, I mean, it is significant, but it's not significant enough to drop him out of meta, probably. And by the way, like the reason that this is so significant is because Felix's auto attack applies anti-heal, and so now between procs you have 0.3 of a second where you're reducing the time that you have anti-heal. And so if you, like, instead of, like, let's say you get hit by Felix's auto attack and then you move out of range, like, he can't proc that again for another 0.3 of a second. You have 0.3 of a second to escape and start that cooldown, whereas, like, previously you may have had, like, you know, 1/10 of a second reduced after getting out of his range for 0.2 of a second or something, right? Like, pretty significant, especially for maybe like Brawl and Ghost, depending on what you're running, Shiv possibly too. Just hunters that can self-peel well. So that is pretty significant. Also, of course, like his spiking power now drops with that change. So that's really significant, actually. We do like to see that. But to see what it's like in practice, I mean, I only got to play against a couple of Felixes during the tech test, so it's not super clear. Bishop, as I mentioned, receives the biggest nerfs. So her level 3 upgrade is only going to reset her Q if the satchel hits an enemy, that's big. Charge time increase from 10 to 11 seconds on shift, which is fine. I mean, that's a nerf, but it's not crazy. Her R kind of got nerfed. Lower turn rate, so less mobility. And in turn, she got a smaller radius as well, and a decreased duration. So all around, just major nerfs to Bishop. So I think she's going to be significantly weaker than she was, again, in Scene Next Fest. And possibly even further down in the list, depending, again, on how weak Felix is, how strong or weak Felix is. Jhin is going to be situationally strong. So this pick is going to depend greatly on how good you are as a Jhin player. Generally, like an Oath Hudson comp is going to be terrible for Jhin players unless you can one burst Hudson, which requires like some mechanical prowess. So if you are an average Jhin player, I would say probably steer away from him unless you're really committed to learning him if you want to perform very well. But if you're a one trick, like I said, my comp is going to have a Jhin who's just going to be one bursting Hudsons. So that's going to open up a lot of doors for us. And I can then, like, worst case scenario, right, Jhin dies, 1-for-1 trade for Hudson, Shrek can clean up with Oath, and Zeph and Myth say those are your other three. So, again, I do think that Jhin has a place, but you have to be good. Sort of the same story with Shiv. There were some minor changes to Shiv's kit. Oh, Jhin just received a visual update, by the way. Looks pretty good. The devs say that he's hot in game. It's not very controversial. Like, he is clearly quite hot. Shiv, so her Q here properly attaches to dynamic objects. I don't think that's really that. It doesn't seem that crazy, and then just some improved visuals. So Shiv remained pretty much unchanged. Again, yeah, same story as Jhin. You need to be able to one burst and get out, which requires mechanical prowess. And her, depending on whether or not there's a kingpin and if Hudson has used this barrier, getting into R is going to be really tricky with Shiv, and like doing that effectively. Jhin has like a more surprising all-in, I think, than Shiv. I think Shiv's is a bit more predictable unless you use your Q, but if you don't have Q, then you can't get out. So I kind of think that Shiv is going to be in a worse place than Jhin this patch, possibly. But again, it's not super clear. So we'll just kind of have to see between these two, but I'm favoring Jhin. Void is going to be, I mean, Void's position here is going to depend greatly on where Phoenix and Bishop lie. Felix and Bishop are going to be stronger than I'm predicting, then Void is going to be very tough to play because he's one of, if not the least mobile hunter in the game. So obviously he's going to struggle into dive comps greatly, but he is very strong in front to back teams. So if we are seeing like an Oath Hudson, say Zeph Myth or Zeph Kingpin team, then Void will be very strong in something like that, especially because Hudson's so slow while shooting. So there's going to be like, there's room for him to be great right now, especially like because Hudson's probably going to be the strongest hunter. And I think Void is the best counter to Hudson. So like Zeph Void combo is going to be completely ridiculous if the meta does shift to this immobile front to back style. Jewel, I think, is going to be in a much weaker state than the 3 alternatives that I have listed here. Unless she's playing in a dive comp, in which case I think that Brawl is just going to be better. In front to back, she's going to struggle because she's just outranged by Myth Ghost and Shrike. And without a Felix to all in or a Bishop to all in consistently, she, again, is going to, like, you can only really play Jewel, in my opinion, when you have a Felix and or Bishop on your team. So, and again, I think Brawl will probably just do a better job unless you're a Jewel one trick. But yeah, if you're not a Jewel one trick, I would probably like steer away from Jewel in general, unless maybe like your team is Brawl, Felix, Bishop, and Jewel, and you don't play supports. Then I would probably recommend playing Jewel in that situation. So again, like she kind of has a place somewhat, but I don't think it's going to be especially strong. Aluna is still, I think, going to be more geared towards low elo players. I don't think she will be able to compete with Zeph in any way at high MMR. And even at low MMR, I expect her to be somewhat weak. Yeah, I don't. She's kind of struggling to find a good fit, I think, which is a bit sad. But if you're solo queuing and you don't play Zeph, like even if you're just solo queuing in general and you do play Zeph, like Aluna can potentially make a lot of sense, I think. Because with Zeph, you do need that team coordination, and if your team is pretty disconnected, then Aluna can kind of carry. So at least with respawns. So she has a place, but again, I think it's going to be like niche. And I think Celeste is the only underwhelming hunter this patch. If she's going into a like front to back team, you know, fighting against a front to back team with Shrike, I mean Shrike's bird is a hard counter to Celeste's ult. If you haven't seen examples of that, like I have tons on the montages. Like it's just as soon as Celeste's R pops, if you have bird up, like she's dead basically. And there's kind of a similar story with Ghost R and Myth's Arrow Rain, which is Rain of Arrows, which is her Q. So I do think Celeste is going to struggle. I mean, a good Celeste is of course annoying if they time their R right, but like they have to be very cautious. They will have to be very cautious about cooldowns this patch, and just that stationary position that she's gonna be in. I don't know. You're gonna have to time it with dashes. It's not gonna work if you just are in like what has worked with the Felix comp. So that wraps up the tier list. I hope this guide helps you guys find something that will work for your team. Good luck on the 20th. I hope to see you guys in queue. And with that, yeah, catch some wins.